All right. So being a mom, my time is very limited, and so whenever I get a chance to do these podcasts, I'm kind of doing several at one time. Because I was an apparel engineer, that's exactly actually what my master's is in. I worked for America's oldest and rarest factory. Hi, back in 2014 for about 8 years until it was defrauded by fraudulent investors. But I really understand the whole exploitation practices, whether it's especially when it comes to factories and how they can get free labors. Um, Please give me a break. Anyways, how they can get free labor for their work and how they can circumvent labor laws. So one of the things that they do is called an apprenticeship. And with an apprenticeship, a corporation can come in, they can pay the school, they can give the school a very healthy financial gift. And usually it's like, well, where's that financial gift going? Well, it's certainly not going to the professors who are getting substituted with the cheap job labor substitution of adjunct instructors. But they can give these universities or these trade schools a financial gift. And with that financial gift, they'll then come into this apprenticeship agreement where they will use their trade school students in order to work in the factory to have that experience. And this is what they'll say. It's for this experience that they're going to need whenever they graduate. So they end up being able to not only not have to pay the student. Some of them might have a system where they don't have to pay the student anything, and instead the student has to pay the school in order to have the privilege to work at that, yeah, in order to work at the factory, in order to gain that experience that's necessary for them to be ahead when they graduate. So you have a system where the school itself is getting financial contributions from a factory, and then they turn around and make the students pay for the privilege of working at that factory. The factory is then able to get free labor from that student, and when the student graduates, they can turn around and push that student into a non-compete contract or a oh shoot, what's the word? The gag order, basically, or they can push them out of the industry completely, a non-compete contract where they're not allowed to be in that industry for 5 years under some kind of intellectual property idea that, the student now is a risk to the corporation's intellectual property rights, and therefore they're not allowed to work in the industry for 5 years. So you have a situation where a trade school student, has paid into a school system, to work for free at a factory at either free or maybe even a reduced price of $2 an hour. It's something ridiculous like that. And it's definitely below the $725 or $750 required cost of an employee of any kind of company under our labor laws. But as an apprenticeship, you can get away with either free work for your corporation or your factory, or a very, very reduced hourly price, something that you would expect to see in a third world country. And so then the student, once they graduate, they're out of the system. They're not able to compete in that system anymore. They're not able to be the factory's not going to keep them on. And so they're no longer able to be in that industry because now they're a threat to the corporation. And so we get a reciprocal of a replenishment, if you would, of free labor constantly coming in as each new class is buying into the system, is paying the university or the trade school for the opportunity to work for free, only to be shut out at the end. These are things that are not going to help anybody. They're certainly not going to help the student who's being exploited for free labor. It's the only thing that's going to help really is that factory. And we have these kind of systems already set up in China that our U.S. corporations are used to using. Not only is it trade school students, but it's also things like undocumented immigrants. There are concentration labor camps in China that are coming to the United States, one of them being Foxconn, which got in trouble for that very thing. In China. And so now these things are coming to the United States, and they're getting set up as deportation centers, but they're really workforce camps where undocumented immigrants, because they have no legal rights, and so therefore they have no legal protection under the United States U.S. Constitution, or so they think. It's actually, we do have protection for them under the United States Constitution 13th Amendment, which forbids slavery and indentured servants. So the idea is that, by using undocumented immigrants here in the United States for free labor for corporations, that they have no rights. But under our U.S. Constitution, which protected, if you remember, we had Irish immigrants that came through, and they were being used as indentured servants. They would be required to work for a certain amount of years in order to have passage, in order to have the United States. We have laws now that prevent this kind of behavior. We have laws now that prevent people from, remember back in America, whenever we used to be in the slave business, and we would steal people from Africa and we'd bring them over on ships, and then we would sell off their kids to who knows where, or we would just use them as slaves, and they had no rights. Well, we now have a 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution that forbids this kind of behavior. And it doesn't matter if corporations are able to legalize corporate abuse by manipulating manipulating Christians into becoming these soldiers of a corporate-based concentration labor camp system, so that adoption centers can sell off their kids for cash. We don't have a structure in the United States that allows this legally. The only way this can happen is if it's done illegally, and the only way it can hide illegally is if it's done through emotional distractions where people, a religious intention is added. So this idea of God's abomination of, these people are an abomination of God, or you're being God's army, or blah, 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 that they tend to do. And if we go into that kind of system, now we're bringing back what the Founding Fathers got away from in England, where you had the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, who was trying to usurp government control and, control the kings and control the rulers under this religious dictatorship, if you would. And, if you recall back in the 1500s, we had Martin Luther, who rebelled against the whole idea. And we had, here in America, we had the Protestant Revolution that rebelled against the entire idea. So we're starting to see today in America the systems that have been specifically legally said, you can't do this here in the United States of America. I know we did it in our past, but we have now laws that are formed that say, nope, you can't do it. And so if we uphold those laws, then we will stop treating people as though they have no rights here in the United States. We will stop going into the slave business and justifying it who knows how. And we would progress beyond our ancestors who got it wrong. It's so easy to just stop trying to rewrite the past, because we don't have a time machine to fix it, and just learn from those mistakes and create a better future, especially for the kids who's living in the future that we're creating for them today. But I wanted to bring forward especially how factory workers can be exploited for free labor, so that you can see whenever the politicians are saying jobs, 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 all these quantity number of jobs, it does not necessarily mean it's going to be jobs that's going to work in the people's favor, especially if they don't have an education or they don't have a college degree. It's going to be set up not to work in their favor. The blue-collar workers right now are getting abused and used. They are the perfect patsies for the politicians who claim that they are there for the working class, because they're not. They're trying to create these apprenticeship systems here in the United States that England already has and Europe already has, and we can see how the students there and the laborers there have been exploited under the apprenticeship system. I think it was like $2 an hour they got away with paying over there. We're going to have that here, and the more they increase this apprenticeship idea, saying that these students are going to get access to, exposure to the skills that they need in order to be profitable, in the labor industry. Well, let me tell you, we had high-skilled labor here in the United States, and you know what happened to it? Those high-skilled laborers had to train their replacement in India, especially in the tech industry. They had to train their replacement during their layoff period, the 60-day WARN Act layoff period. Oh yeah, you're still working for this company because, WARN Act requires 60 days, but we're going to make you train your replacement. And they don't know anything about what you do, so you're going to have to explain everything to them. We're hiring a cheap labor job substitution for your job because we don't want to pay money. We're going to say that there's a lack of high-skilled labor. There's not. It's a lack of high-skilled labor that people are willing to pay for. We are a cheap nation. No one wants to pay for the things that it costs to create. And they like to cheat, and that's happening right now. We've got corporations getting bailouts who should not be getting bailouts. We've got nonprofits getting bailouts who should not be getting bailouts. We've got people buying into a tax system as a freeloading. And it's not the lower end, it's the higher end, the ones that have trying to get us all to fight each other so we can't see it. Oh yeah, I worked in I'm an apparel engineer, and apparel manufacturing is the first manufacturing industry in the United States of America. It was textile and apparel manufacturing, which has an ugly history of child labor abuse and worker abuse. And even though we haven't really seen it here in the United States, it's still happening in those fast fashion factories over in China. In fact, even the president's daughter is guilty of such a thing, except her whistleblowers were detained by the Chinese government before they could report it on the China Labor Watch sites. There's a lot of people, watchdog groups, that are trying to hold these factories accountable. And I worked in an apparel factory. It was America's oldest and rarest. We had a factory on the 3rd floor. Warehouse and distribution on the 2nd. We did our selling on the 3rd or on the 1st. And so being aware of what was required under the U.S. laws and what they could get away with and what they couldn't get away with versus what people were able to get away with in nations where the labor laws are no longer being regulated or even where they're just being ignored. And knowing the trends that are happening in China, and I have a whole podcast on this, China's increased all their regulations. They've increased their labor laws. It's now too expensive to manufacture in China. And I know people are like, oh, well, China's so cheap. It's not anymore. They've invested in green technology, and they're invested in worker-conscious production. They are kicking the cheap labor factories out. And those cheap labor factories are the U.S. corporations that are used to exploiting people for free labor. And they're coming back to us, which means as people are losing their jobs right now with COVID and everything else, and they're being laid off, especially once you're 40, I think is the new age discrimination age, 40. 70-year-olds are still running our country, but 40-year-olds can't find jobs because, we become these health risks after then. So we have, situations where opportunities of exploitation out of desperation, because as people are losing their jobs and they're wondering how they're going to keep their roofs over their head and how they're going to keep food on the table, desperation is going to make them start working for things that are less than what they would normally be willing to work for under those situations. And before you know it, we'll have all the corporations exploiting American workers saying, if I didn't do it, they wouldn't eat. If we don't stop this crap now, this is what we're going to be looking at. And so when a politician is talking about jobs, challenge them and say, well, how much money is that going to pay, and how are you going to make that happen? And those apprenticeship, is that going to exploit my child? Is that going to exploit my student? Are they going to have to pay these high tuitions only to work for free for a factory and then not be able to pay their student loans because they're not getting any kind of grace anymore? Even though corporations who bankrupt or investors who come in and bankrupt companies can get full forgiveness for their bankruptcies and their debts, and a student who's trying to improve their life can't. Challenge those people and see what they do, because I bet they don't have answers for you, and I bet they'll freak out. Because people who don't have a plan, who are trying to manipulate the system and trying to cheat a system, are not going to have the answers for you when you ask them clear, pointed questions and you don't allow them to emotionally manipulate you anymore with any kind of marketing slogans or any kind of buzzwords or any kind of blame game, especially when it comes to parties. Don't allow that stuff. Ask the real questions. Ask them about the cost. because I guarantee you they will not have the answers when it comes to how they're going to cover the cost of what the things that they're talking about, because they don't have a plan.